Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. At least 197 Palestinians, including 58 children, have been killed as the ruthless Israeli bombardment of Gaza Strip has entered its second week. Israel launched dozens of new strikes after its caretaker Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said an end to hostilities is not imminent. United States President Joe Biden says his administration is working with Israelis and Palestinians for a sustained calm. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussed the situation in phone calls with the Qatari, Egyptian and Saudi foreign ministers. Indian troops have martyred 2 civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir's Srinagar district. The youths were targeted during a so-called cordon and search operation in Konmo area of the district. The occupying troops have martyred more than 325 civilians since the revocation of the valley status in August 2019. Iran has ruled out agreeing to a preliminary deal with the world powers on the revival of the 2015 nuclear deal during Vienna talks. In a press briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh said no agreement would be drafted until all conditions are met. He added the 3 working groups have finalized a considerable part of the remaining issues. India has registered over 4,100 coronavirus deaths and more than 281,000 cases in the past 24 hours. In Pakistan, 74 more people lost their lives to the virus, while more than 3,200 tested positive overnight. The global number of coronavirus infections has crossed 163 million, with more than 3.37 million deaths. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Almost 200 Palestinians, including 58 children, have been killed as the ruthless Israeli bombardment of Gaza Strip has entered its second week. Israel launched dozens of new strikes after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said an end to hostilities was not imminent.
In over a week's savagery campaign against innocent, undefended Palestinian civilians, the apartheid Israeli forces have killed scores and wounded over 1,200 people. Israeli air raids on Gaza City flattened 3 buildings and killed at least 42 more people just on Sunday. Rescuers in Gaza are still struggling to pull survivors from under the rubble of the collapsed buildings. However, defying all norms of humanity, Israeli forces are now blocking the rescue equipment from reaching the emergency sites. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces used drones to drop tear gas on Palestinian demonstrators near the Beit el settlement. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki said Israel is committing war crimes. He urged international pressure on Israel at a UN Security Council session as life becomes unlivable in Gaza.
Palestine have been suffering from such destruction for 15 years, but now the situation is getting even worse. This conflict has aggravated the suffering of the Palestinian people. We also haven't found any solutions. This is literally a tragedy of humanitarianism.
U.S. President Joe Biden says his administration is working with Israelis and Palestinians for a sustained calm. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussed the situation in phone calls with the Qatari, Egyptian and Saudi foreign ministers. This comes after UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned of an uncontainable security and humanitarian crisis. But the UN Security Council meeting, already delayed by Israel's ally, the US, resulted in little action. Pakistan regretted that the Council has been unable to even hold this meeting and to take action to halt Israeli aggression for so long. Pakistan's UN envoy Munir Akram condemned Israel's use of indiscriminate and disproportionate force, including aerial bombing. Norway, Tunisia, and China also expressed deep concerns about the rising number of civilian casualties, calling for an immediate end to hostilities.
The most urgent and pressing task at this moment is to cease fire and stop violence. What's equally important is to advance a just settlement of the Palestinian question on the basis of two-state solution. For all of that, the Security Council shoulders heavy responsibilities.
Meanwhile, the Associated Press top editor has demanded an independent investigation into Israel's bombing of a building in Gaza that was housing media houses. In Lebanon, demonstrations in solidarity with Palestinians were held for third day at the border with Palestine, while thousands of Jordanians took to the streets of the capital Amman, calling on the kingdom to scrap its peace deal with Israel.
Well, also, Indian troops have martyred 2 civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir Srinagar district. The occupying troops have martyred more than 325 civilians since the revocation of the valley in August 2019. The youths were targeted during a so-called cordon and search operation in Honmo area of the district. The operation was going on while the whole area has been sealed. Protests erupted in the area after the martyrdom of the youths. Hundreds of people gathered outside the building where the youths were targeted. They chanted anti-India and pro-freedom slogans. Now, Pakistan has conveyed its serious concerns to Afghanistan over its recent irresponsible statements and baseless allegations. In a recent démarche to Kabul's ambassador, Pakistan's Foreign Office emphasized that groundless accusations erode trust and the environment between the two brotherly countries. It urged that such actions also disregard the country's constructive role in facilitating the Afghan peace process. Meanwhile, Iran has ruled out agreeing to a preliminary deal with the world powers on the revival of the 2015 nuclear deal during talks in Vienna. In a press briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh said no agreements would be drafted until all conditions are met. He said the 3 working groups have finalized a considerable part of the remaining issues. Khatibzadeh added some of those issues are left to be solved through political decisions. The spokesperson said Joint Commission of the deal would reconvene this week if deemed necessary. Earlier, Russia's envoy in Vienna said he held fruitful discussions related to major issues with the U.S. Special Envoy for Iran, Robert Malley. Now, the UN General Assembly is set to consider a call for an arms embargo on Myanmar's military junta. A UN official said, unlike Security Council, General Assembly resolutions are non-binding but carry political significance. Introduced by Liechtenstein with support from EU, Britain and the US, the measures will be considered at a plenary. If approval by consensus cannot be reached, then the full Assembly, 193 member states, will vote on the measure. This comes a day after the army seized a small rebel town in western Chin state, which took up arms 3 weeks ago. The junta has killed nearly 800 people across the country in post-coup violence since February this year. Now, India has registered over 4,100 coronavirus deaths and more than 281,000 cases in the past 24 hours. The global number of coronavirus infections has crossed 163 million, with more than 3.37 million deaths. Details in this report.
The COVID-19 crisis in India has exacerbated the country's multi-pronged calamities emanating from its fragile socio-economic and political fabric. A top Indian virologist resigned from the government's panel of advisors on coronavirus variants weeks after questioning the authorities' handling of the pandemic. Indian doctors have been recording a huge spurt in cases of mucormycosis, an aggressive hard-to-treat fungal infection among COVID-19 patients. Residents living in the riverbanks are getting extremely anxious as more floating bodies keep appearing in Indian rivers. They said hundreds of bodies are being buried at the riverbank every day. Meanwhile, in the tough times, a food delivery network across Mumbai has been offering free lunches to help out patients on a budget.
When the second lockdown started, it was so hard to buy food because everything was shut down. These people give the food here, which is really tasty and fills our stomachs. And we can save money. Whatever money we are saving is going for better medical treatment.
In England, a cross-party inquiry group has demanded a public inquiry into whether Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision to delay adding India to the travel red list of countries was influenced by his desire to start trade talks with New Delhi. As the UK has eased more restriction, health experts said people should avoid socializing indoors to prevent the Indian variant. Saudi Arabia has opened its land, air and sea borders today after more than a year of restrictions. The country announced that foreign vaccinated visitors arriving by air will no longer need to quarantine.
Thank God, after a year and a half of banning traveling, today we can travel. Thanks to God. Now someone can finish his work, whether it is for tourism or for business. And hopefully this pandemic will get to an end, so everyone can travel, God willing.
U.S. top infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci said, undeniable effects of racism have led to severe health disparities that especially impacted African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans during the pandemic. A new poll has showed that more than 80% of Japanese oppose hosting the Olympics this year, with just under 10 weeks until the Tokyo Games.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 74 more people have lost their lives to the coronavirus as the country's death toll approaches 20,000. The Health Ministry has reported more than 3,200 new cases overnight as the country's caseload tops 88,000. It said that nearly 78,000 people have recovered so far from the COVID-19. Meanwhile, more than 3.8 million doses of the vaccine against coronavirus have been administered so far. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has begun his Nordic tour, in which he will be attending the Arctic Council ministerial meeting. The State Department said Blinken arrived in Copenhagen as a part of a Nordic tour from May 16th to 20th. Blinken will also be discussing the bilateral relations and the Nord Stream 2 with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. The bilateral negotiations between Blinken and Lavrov will take place on the sidelines of the Arctic Council meeting. The Arctic Council ministerial meeting will take place in Reykjavik this week. Moving on, Russia seeks to outlaw the political movement of jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. A Russian court is ready to hear an extremism case against the Navalny political network. The court hearing comes as a sweeping crackdown against the political movement of Putin's most staunch critic. The Russian parliament's lower house is also set to debate a bill that would bar political activism as a part of the crackdown. The bill will prevent individuals from alleged extremist organizations from being elected lawmakers in Russia. Prosecutors in Russia had earlier labeled the Navalny networks as extremist after staunch criticism of the Kremlin. Russian treatment of Navalny in jail has already prompted global outrage and criticism. Now, Chile's center-right ruling coalition WH.O is expected to fall short of keeping themselves in control of the Constitution delegates' vote. According to the electoral authorities, the coalition of Chile WH.O has secured just 21% of the vote. Independent candidates have emerged as the winners of the election with 69% of the votes counted. Local media projected independents would win 45 seats, Chile WH.O 39, and the centre-left 25, and the far left would take 28. The ruling coalition needs at least a one-third of the majority in the elections to push for a constitutional reform. Changing the constitution was a central demand to emerge from the fierce social protests that erupted over inequality and elitism in October 2019. Since then, the popularity of the ruling coalition has greatly decreased owing to pandemic handling and other economic issues. Now moving to Peru, where the socialist presidential candidate Pedro Castillo and right-wing Keiko Fujimori are neck and neck just 3 weeks before the runoff. A voter simulation shows Castillo has 51.1% support and Fujimori 48.9%. Another poll shows Castillo leading Fujimori in voting intentions by 36.5% to 29.6%. Both have outlined new taxes and royalties for miners in their campaigns. Castro says he will raise taxes and royalties in the mining sector and renegotiate tax contracts of large companies if elected. Fujimori, contesting from jail over human rights abuse, has also pledged to distribute Peru's mineral wealth more evenly. More news coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, in the USA, Union Pacific train hauling hazardous materials has derailed and caught fire in the city of CHILE, Iowa. Authorities say dozens of people were evacuated and there are no reports of injuries or fatalities. They said the derailment involved 47 rail cars, while an inquiry to know the cause of the incident is under investigation. The fire chief in CHILE says the train was carrying fertilizer and ammonium. Now, in India, at least 12 people have died after the cyclone TAUKTAE brushed past the coastal states of Kerala, Karnataka and Goa. It is the most intense cyclone in more than 2 decades on the west coast. The storm has left a trail of destruction in the state. Meanwhile, more than 150,000 people have been evacuated to safety in Gujarat ahead of the cyclone. Strong winds forced authorities to suspend operations at Mumbai's airport and close some main roads. The India Met Department has categorized the storm as an extremely severe one. With gusts up to 210 kilometers per hour, it is rated 1 level below the super cyclone category. Now, in Brazil's Amazon region, thousands of families have been affected by heavy rains and flooding brought by the La Nina weather phenomenon. Ongoing since last year, the event is characterized by unusually cold temperatures in parts of the Pacific Ocean. It has sparked chaos in the town of Panama, where a state of emergency has been issued. Families used boats and canoes to move around the town, home to 14,000 people. The floods could become the worst in a century, with some 350,000 people affected. Now, the European Union has been urged to toughen its weak environmental targets for the reduced emissions of carbon dioxide. European Campaign Group Transport and Environment said the bloc needs to shift to electric vans to cut emissions and reduce fossil fuel usage. The group said the environmental targets of the EU are very weak and it needs to step up to ensure the goal of 31% emission reduction. It has demanded that the EU should prevent van makers from building plug-in hybrid vans that rely on fossil fuel engines. The group said the EU should set a 100% carbon dioxide reduction target by 2035. The World Health Organization says working long hours is killing hundreds of thousands of people every year. The study warns the worsening trend may accelerate due to the pandemic.
The first global study on the loss of life associated with longer working hours has depicted some horrifying effects on human health. A paper published in the Environment International Journal shows that 1 in every 10 people globally worked long hours in 2016, while 745,000 people died from diseases associated with overwork in the same year.
We found working 55 or more hours per week increased risk of dying of ischemic heart disease by 17% after 10 years. This was based on data from 340,000 participants in 22 cohort study globally. We also found working 55 hours or more per week increased the risk of having a stroke by 35%.
The joint study by WHO and the International Labour Organization shows that most of the victims were men. Officials say the surge in remote working due to COVID-19 and the economic slowdown may have increased the risk.
We have some evidence that shows that when countries go into national lockdown, the numbers of hours work increased by about 10%. This is from a study from the National Bureau of Economic Research in the United States across, I think, 15 countries in 2 regions. They've shown there is an increase in working hours, so this might well be operating through teleworking, but we don't know enough quite yet, but it looks like it.
According to the study, people living in Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific were most affected.
Well, now in Peru, a zoo in the capital Lima is presenting 2 endangered baby American crocodiles born through artificial insemination.
Endangered crocodiles born via artificial insemination are making their first appearance at the Huachipa Zoo. The zookeepers say the baby crocs were born in February and are doing well. They say the crocs are almost 3.5 months old now and measure 26 centimeters in length. The crocodile eggs were incubated for 90 days and were the only surviving 2 out of 24.
One of them was born weighing 35 grams, the other weighing 40. Now that they are 3 months and 10 days old, the animals have gained more than 70 grams per individual. So those animals were born with 17 centimeters total body length. And as of today, they are 26 centimeters long. That is, the animals are on the right track. They are developing well.
Crocodiles are still classified as an endangered species, although the number of large reptiles have rebounded in some parts of the world.
These animals are currently in danger of extinction. Their population in the wild is reduced due to the pollution of their natural habitat. Their habitat is being used by people and also by agricultural workers. Any reproduction in captivity is a conservation success.
According to experts, the American crocodile, which can grow up to 16 feet, are shy and reclusive. They can be found in countries like Mexico, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, and the United States.
Well, now Mexico's Andrea Meza has been crowned the new Miss Universe as the competition was finally held after a year's delay due to the pandemic. The 26-year-old Meza was selected from 73 other candidates representing their countries and territories. She was presented the crown by Miss Universe 2019 Zozibini Tonzi in a ceremony held in Hollywood, Florida. According to her contestant biography, Meza holds a degree in software engineering. The show was co-hosted by Maria Lopez and former Miss Universe Olivia Colpo, and also featured a special performance by Luis Fonsi. Now, in business stories, European stocks have dipped as global investors weighed concerns over a rise in inflation and an increase in coronavirus cases. The pan-European stock 600 hovered fractionally below the flat line in early trade. The autos added 0.7%, while travel and leisure stocks dropped 0.7%. The UK's domestically focused mid-cap index was flat, but hovered near a one-week high as the British economy reopened. Earlier, Asia stocks traded mixed as investors react to the release of Chinese economic data. Now, Bitcoin saw partial recovery after Elon Musk clarified in a tweet that Tesla has not dumped its holdings. Earlier, his weekend tweets hinted Tesla is considering or may have already sold some of its massive holdings. Bitcoin fell more than 9% on Monday to a 3-month low of $42,185. But it later rallied more than 5% to cross $45,000. Musk has done a U-turn on cryptocurrency in the past week. He announced that Tesla will stop accepting Bitcoin due to fears that its energy use is hurting the planet. now let's have a look at how the weather is doing. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.